I impose a couple conditions on myself when making this video. No games that were made by Shannara, no matter how forgotten they are, and no games that are mentioned in the AdventureGamers.com's Top 100 Adventure Games list. So that excludes many great titles like Toonstruck, Simon the Sorcerer, Broken Sword, Sanitarium, Discworld, Blade Runner, the Journeyman Project series, and many more. While I wouldn't say that I had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to make this list, some of the games are a bit generic or rough around the edges as they didn't even make a very thorough Top 100 list. I dropped many games from this list for various reasons, but I'll give short summaries of some of the more interesting ones that didn't make the cut at the end of this video. Alien Incident is an interesting title from a Finnish perspective, as it was made by a local developer called House Marquee and was released internationally. To my knowledge, it's the first Finnish adventure game. It mustn't have done very well, as I've never seen it mentioned anywhere before going to PDF scans of old game magazines last July. In my review of Duckman, I called it the rarest adventure game, but judging by lack of eBay listings, Alien Incident might just be as rare, if not more. The story tells of a mad scientist who creates a wormhole that summons aliens in our dimension, who then start kidnapping people. The mad scientist happens to be your uncle, so you have to rescue him when he gets kidnapped. Cutscenes that show you what the aliens are currently up to are frequent if short, and to be honest, they are quite annoying as they constantly interrupt you. The game takes place during Halloween, but a couple of jack-o'-lanterns aside, that theme doesn't have much influence on the game at all. Though the game is very dark visually, even to the point that I'd consider it a flaw in the art design. While outdoor areas that are lit by moonlight look nice, indoor areas and a few other screens like this aren't lit enough and can lead to pixel hunting. Generally speaking, the graphics don't stack up to the LucasArts and Sierra standards of the time, but you can't expect that from a small independent studio. The art style is going for a Monkey Island 2/Fate of the Atlantis sort of look, with a bit of Day of the Tentacle cartooniness and fisheye lens perspectives thrown in for good measure. They obviously didn't have the budget to animate everything, but what animation there is look quite nice, sans the 3D stuff. Little details like this Commodore 64-inspired operating system, animated lake, and Pong playing in the background show that the developers did care and put effort into this, but the end result is uneven due to the occasional blurriness and the previously mentioned abundant darkness. The puzzles are quite straightforward and well telegraphed. There isn't much of item combining or having to come up with wild, out-of-the-box solutions to puzzles. I'm not sure if it's possible to die in this game, but I never did. That's not surprising, as obviously this game is strongly influenced by early 90s output of LucasArts. The writing doesn't come close to that standard, as is common in copycat adventure games, but there are some decent jokes here and there, some Star Wars references, and even a Stardust cameo. They just couldn't resist advertising their own game. I wouldn't call Alien Incident a criminally underrated forgotten gem of the genre like Toonstruck is, but it's a decent pick if you're looking for a light-hearted LucasArts-style adventure. Long as you keep your expectations in check, that is, this game is no Day of the Tentacle. I actually translated my old review of this game almost immediately when I started this channel, but I noticed that someone else had already reviewed it, so I decided not to cover it. However, it is one of the most unique and memorable adventure games I know, so it's a perfect fit for this video. The game is set in a cyberpunk version of England and stars a possibly demented protagonist, who has been seeing dreams of a weird cult that urges him to kill 7 people in order to stop some kind of doomsday prophecy from happening. The game was supplied with a diary written by the protagonist Ryan, and it's a wonderful example of the kind of storytelling you just don't see in modern games. As you scroll through the pages, the writing gets more incoherent the further you get, and certain words like 7 and Dreamweb start to repeat. There are typos in the text as well to enhance its realism, and even Ryan himself has realized that something isn't right by reading entries from days from which he has no recollection of. Even though there's not much to the story, it's open to interpretation and the ending scene is among the most memorable that I've seen in a video game. I'm not going to spoil more of the story here. Play it yourself or watch a long play from YouTube. The mechanics also distinguish Dreamweb from its contemporaries. You can pick up every object in the game, and solutions to puzzles are fairly intuitive. There's no insane adventure game logic to be found here. The graphics aren't great, but there's a magnifying glass to help you see what it is you're looking for. Even then, some objects are only a few pixels tall, so there's quite a bit of literal pixel hunting. But I think it's actually easier to miss important items in some games with far better graphics, as everything is labeled and inspectable in Dreamweb. However, you have no idea whether or not any particular item is useful. There's also nice attention to detail in some scenes, like leaves becoming bloody when you shoot a guy. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that you kill people in this game, but what's notable is that even with such limited animation, it feels like your actions have weight to them, like what you're committing is irreversible as your victims drop dead. I also like the in-game computer system. Even though it isn't used much, it's always immersive when you actually have to interact yourself when you come across computers in computer games. The atmosphere is also top-notch, maybe even the best in the genre. The game mostly takes place in rainy streets, seedy bars, and cramped and untidy apartments. While the voice actors are amateurs, the uncertainty and lack of emotion in Ryan's voice enhances the melancholic mood.
My girlfriend Eden lies in bed with her eyes half closed and the covers pulled tightly around her. Her dark hair spills out over the pillow. She has a slight frown on her face.
Another contributing factor is the gloomy and ominous cyberpunk soundtrack. There are only a handful of songs, but a few of them are incredibly powerful and striking. It's a shame that Matt Selden, who composed the songs, hasn't done any other game soundtracks. It's amazing what a small team of 3 guys that worked on this game accomplished with a tight budget. It's effectively an indie game, and like all good independent productions, it knows how to turn budget limitations into an advantage. The Adventures of the Fifth Musketeer examine 16th century France through a LucasArts lens. You play the role of a young musketeer, who promises a dying man to track down his killers and recover a will that they stole. The game is very humorous right from the get-go, and the jokes hit their mark with surprising accuracy. This is one of the funniest non-LucasArts adventure games that I've played. Though history buffs might not appreciate the anachronistic and fourth wall-breaking jokes that poke fun at the time period's expense. You've got a wisecracking manservant that follows you around, and he's the biggest complaint I have with the game. Both times that I played the game, I've got stuck in endlessly repeating lines when your servant starts giving his input or whining when you want to leave the scene.
It wouldn't do any harm to go to church once in a while.
Well, the wine's okay, but I've never really cared.
It wouldn't do any harm to go to church once in a while.
Well, the wine's okay, but I've never really cared for those little biscuits.
It wouldn't do any harm to go to church once in a while.
Well, the wine's okay.
As Confucius once said, if you ain't got nothing entertaining to say, then shut the hell up!
Other than that, it's a really good LucasArts clone that looks and sounds the part. This game immediately caught my attention with its beautiful box art the first time I laid my eyes on it. The cover picture is actually the work of a famous fantasy illustrator, Lois Royo. The intro scene uses an astonishing pixel art rendition of the same picture. Take note, modern pixel artists, this is what an Amiga game from '92 could look like. But enough about the cover. The game itself is an extremely ambitious adventure RPG hybrid. You can create a character at the beginning, which I couldn't do in the DOS version, which I'm showing here as it's easier to capture footage from. Once you start the game, there's a lot to do, You've got a programmable wrist computer that can translate alien languages. There's a simplified in-game programming language you need to figure out in order to make functional programs. These programs can do tasks like keep track of your health as you have to eat, drink, and sleep in this game. There are few arcade games within the game world that you can play, and more impressively, there are vehicles like cars and flying ships that you can fly, with actual 3D polygon graphics. There's an in-game measurement system, and the RPG systems are surprisingly extensive as well, with attributes like charisma and intelligence, said to have an effect on how people react to you. In a proper RPG fashion, you can steal and attack anything you want, and when you do get into fights, you can choose either from strategic or arcade combat. You can also recruit random people to your party, though getting one to join you is hard, and the game is very open and non-linear to boot. There's a staggering amount of depth and content here, all crammed to a few floppy disks. Sadly, everything is buried under a poorly designed interface and visuals that make it easy to get lost. Different buildings and places aren't marked in any way, so you need to consult the map that was supplied with the game. As if that didn't make navigation hard enough, the screen often splits into smaller segments when you enter a new area, which can make the viewing area really cramped. The conversation system is also flawed. When you talk to people, conversations branch and you gain new talking points like in Wizardry 8. However, you don't have the ability to type in words to ask things from NPCs, which is a feature this game could have really used. Due to the open-ended nature of the game, I feel like I've never made any progress in the story. Though I've tried writing down useful conversations, based on what I've read in an online walkthrough, you're supposed to collect deeds from various people, as the story is centered around some planet trust called Shedishan, holding a monopoly on a valuable resource called Echiatone 21. As superficial as my experiences from this game are, I'm still impressed by it. Like the game's overall design, the visuals are very ambitious as well. Every single screen is handcrafted and full of details. Traffic sound and the murmur of a crowd gives the impression that the game world is alive and teeming with life. There are also tons of animated objects, from walking pedestrians to dancing crowds to tiny little touches like a flashing movie screen being reflected on the audience, and flying cars in the distance that are just a few pixels long. While the visuals do a poor job of conveying where you are and what you're supposed to do, they're still very impressive from a technical point of view. B.A.T 2 is simply too ambitious, much like other similar hybrid games from the time period. But despite my criticisms, I've got to say that it still does a commendable job of juggling all these different gameplay elements. It's like the developers wanted to turn a tabletop RPG experience into a video game, so they insisted on including item interaction of an adventure game, a branching conversation system, a flight simulator, a racing game, a few arcade games, and 2 combat systems in a single CRPG. The in-game programming language alone could have been the main gameplay mechanic in a less ambitious game. Too bad that the confusing UI and lack of direction will turn off most players from experiencing the whole thing from start to finish. I'd love to see a similar game being done with a more intuitive interface and a more clear visual style. But ironically enough, it seems that just when technology evolved to the point that making improvements like this was possible, it became impossible to make games like this commercially. 9 The Last Resort is a bizarre game with a surreal art style straight from a fever dream. It was actually produced by Robert De Niro. 9 is one of those really mechanical adventure games where you deal a lot with machinery, levers, and things like that, as opposed to constantly conversing with NPCs and solving inventory puzzles. How you move in the game is also kind of Myst-inspired. Each scene is pre-rendered, and you have a 3-dimensional view of each area, but you can only move to select locations. It's actually quite annoying that you have to click the screen so much to move around. If you want to turn 180 degrees, you have to watch a few screen transitions. Your goal is to find the missing pieces of a device called the Muse Machine. This weird airplane man, who is voiced by Jim Belushi, follows you around and gives you hints on how to solve these puzzles. But other than that, a lot of the game consists of solitary puzzle solving. I haven't played the highly praised Riven, so I can't tell how this game fares against it when it comes to puzzle design, but at least I can say that the puzzles are hard. Personally, I'm not very fond of this game, but it is undeniably unique and even well produced, so if you're a fan of weird avant-garde adventure games like Bad Mojo, The Dark Eye, and Neverhood, this game is worth checking out. Azrael's Tear is really unique for the fact that it uses real-time 3D environments and first-person movement. The only other adventure games that use the same style that I know of are the Tex Murphy games and Normality. As 1996 was the year when 3D gaming really hit off, it's understandable that Azrael's Tear got left in the dust of titles such as Quake. It's unfortunate as this game has quite forward-thinking design. You've got a health bar, and you can engage in combat whenever you want, yet the adventure aspects are not dumbed down. Because it's such an experimental title, the gameplay can feel quite cumbersome. You move by using the arrow keys, or by pressing down both mouse keys simultaneously. If you hold down the right mouse button, you can look up and down, but the controls are reversed, so up moves down and vice versa. At least you have the option of sprinting by pressing Shift, which is a nice feature to have in a 3D adventure game, where you have to do a lot of backtracking between puzzles. You also have a scanner to help you explore this 3D environment. Whenever you click on an object, it scans it and tells you all kinds of information about it, and sometimes when you enter a new area, you're given a report on how many exits there are, whether any life forms are present, and so on. This feature actually reminded me of RFS 81 from Wizardry 8. The scanner is often needed as the low-res textures can be really blurry. If you stand right next to a wall, you can actually count the amount of pixels on screen. But the graphics aren't the only reason why you have the scanner. Sometimes it provides you information that you couldn't otherwise figure out, like how this block of stone contains a key, and the fact that the water here is too hot to touch by hand. As you're a treasure hunter searching for the Holy Grail, you spend most of the time exploring dank caves alone. So if you're looking for a light-hearted adventure that's heavy on dialogue, this game is not for you. But that doesn't mean there isn't any story. You pick up information written down by Crusaders. There are unskippable story scenes here and there.
Trip himself in time. For now, what can we do to lessen the damage?
If you ask too many questions, they'll get bored with you, and one guy actually shot me. I guess it was karma for the fact that I shot the first NPC I ever saw in this game. Which reminds me that this game is non-linear, but to what extent, I can't tell. For instance, there's a guy guarding this area and he knocked me out in an instant, after which I woke up from a library, but I loaded my previous save, went back there and shot him with an elephant gun. But then I tried to enter the area before a certain story scene was triggered and my game crashed. I don't know what to make of this game. It's obviously limited by its engine, as you have to stare at the loading screen every time you enter a new room. There are also sudden deaths, which force you to save frequently, but on the other hand, the sound design and atmosphere are pretty good for a 3D game made in '96. The experience felt almost Ultima Underworld-like at times. I also like the immersive UI design as well. I have a habit of going on tangents whenever I come across a feature in an old game that you don't see in modern ones, and this game reminded me that you don't really see context-appropriate UI art in modern first-person shooter games. It's not a mind-blowing experience in my eyes, but this game definitely has all the makings of a cult classic. If you like Freddy Farkas and would like to see more Western adventure games, then you're in luck, as I didn't include just one but two Westerns on the list. First up, there's Tequila and Boom-Boom. It was made by a small developer called B.A.T, who also developed the Amiga adventure Nippon Safes Incorporated. Although the game predates Pajama Sam, it goes for a similar kid-friendly style, with more limited interaction. When you start the game, you can't access or travel to most of the areas before you trigger certain scenes in a linear order. This hand-holding design philosophy conflicts with how obtuse the puzzles can be, mainly the fact that this game implements QuickTime events that give you few seconds to react, which can be confusing in a game with a lot of non-interactive cutscenes. In the very first screen, you have to shoot this lamp to ricochet a bullet. But it took me a while to even realize that you could shoot in this game to begin with, and you can't skip dialogue in cutscenes, which makes the problem even worse. You have no idea how many times I had to listen to this dim-witted dog before I could finally make some progress. Like I said, the game has a lot of animated scenes, some of which have decent animation, though obviously the developer skipped a lot of corners.
Immense pleasure it is to meet you. Just look at yourself. You're more beautiful, attractive, and wonderful than ever. Oh!
A small studio likely couldn't produce much quality 2D animation with a budget. Three Skulls of Toltec is another cartoony Western adventure game released the same year as Tequila, though it's aimed at an older audience. It uses a verb-based interface, and there's more substance to the gameplay. I'd like to tell you more about it, but I got stuck very early on because of a bug that turned my character invisible. But from what I've read and seen online, this game looked somewhat promising. I really like the fast travel option. More adventure games should have that. If you're looking for a newer title, there's also Fester Mud, which ironically looks more dated than both of these games, as often is the case with indie games that mimic retro aesthetics. I personally haven't played it, so I can't say if it's any good. But Freddy Farkas fans might be delighted to hear that Josh Mandel had a part in its development. It also uses a Scum-style interface. Lourdes is a weird CDI exclusive title that's notable for two things: claymation and word-based conversation system. The game looks like any 16-bit action game, but instead of running and gunning, it gives you the option for different interactions like hail, offer, recite, and tools. For instance, one girl won't talk to you before you kneel before her.
Never talk to strangers because there could be dangers, but if they are nice strangers, they'll get down on one knee. I'm Nebka. I know lots of rhymes.
The conversation system is really novel. It's kind of like a consoleized version of Ultima 7's branching conversations. When you talk to NPCs, you can highlight different words from their sentences to further the conversation.
Scan input. Humanoid model XY3B. No bionics. Very well. You may proceed through Prime Pyramid. You organics never know who you are.
The system is quite expansive, and keep in mind that everything's voice acted as well, which is impressive for a game that came out in '92. Another feature that makes this game memorable is the claymation cutscenes. As the game is set in space and you can travel between planets, you come across all kinds of strange alien races. And I have to say, some of the things they say and do are really bizarre.
We just got married. Today.
For our honeymoon, we're flying down to Fornax.
I've never really tried to finish this game, but it's fun to play casually just to see all the weird cutscenes.
We understand you've allied yourself with Zindo. Don't be such a damned fool! Do you realize how many have died for that quest?
Fable is a very typical King's Quest style fantasy adventure. You play as a scrawny teenager called Quickthorpe on a mission to obtain 4 mystical gems. Visually the game is quite nice, but the content is so boring that I could never finish it. The main character is unlikable and the fantasy setting is very cliched and uninteresting for the most part. Shannara is a much better fantasy adventure in my opinion. It's based on the series of books by the same name, written by Terry Brooks, so it's unsurprising that the writing is far better. The story is fairly generic fantasy stuff, but the way it's paced shows that the creators had a good grasp of storytelling. That also isn't a surprise when you hear that the game was designed by Laurie and Corey Cole, who are famous for creating the seminal Quest for Glory series. Shannara is also an adventure RPG hybrid, albeit done in Legend style rather than Sierra style. For those unfamiliar with what that means, the game is easier, the puzzles are more logical, and you can move with the arrow keys. Though it means that the game uses the Legend interface, which automatically combines different actions for you, which can lead to situations like how the game is suggesting to me here to put the herb shop on the lamp. The responses are also more limited. Here I'm trying to pour steaming water on top of the sleeping king, but the game won't let me. Most Sierra games would at least have some kind of tailor-made response, even for asinine out-of-the-box interactions like that. As for RPG elements, there's an overworld map and turn-based random battles, but there's not much to the combat and you don't level up, so fighting is futile. Visually the game is great, probably the best looking game made by Legend, as it's mostly 2D, though there's some 3D animations here and there that look surprisingly okay for 95 low-budget game standards. Snatcher is by no means a forgotten title. In fact, it's more well known today than it was back when it was released. But I suppose some PC gamers might be unfamiliar with it, so it's worth a look. The game was developed by the one and only Hideo Kojima, before he had become famous. The game got its start on PC-88 and MSX in Japan, and then got ported to numerous other platforms over the years. But it's only available on the Sega CD in English. The well-known story borrows elements from and is heavily influenced by Blade Runner, Terminator, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Snatcher takes place in Neo-Kobe City in 2047. You play as Gillian Seed, a special agent who works for Junker, a police agency dedicated to eliminating and investigating Snatchers, a breed of robots that kill people and steal their identities. The story follows a 3-act structure. It starts off small and grows into something bigger. As you'll learn more about the past of our amnesiac hero and what happened in Russia when a biological weapon called Lucifer Alpha was released into the atmosphere 50 years ago. What really makes Snatcher stand out is how fleshed out the game world is. Over the course of the game, you learn things about Neo-Kobe that aren't related to the main storyline. It always adds to my immersion and overall enjoyment when a game manages to make a place feel like a real place, rather than just a set where NPCs only exist to guide the player. The game is more of a visual novel than a proper point-and-click adventure, so that's something to keep in mind. You don't go around collecting everything that isn't nailed down, but the game isn't just dialogue either. You have to investigate events, talk to people, and examine items to move the story forward. The interface is menu-driven, so you don't have to do any pointing and clicking, unless you count a few light gun segments where you can use a justifier. There are only a few traditional puzzles, but it's still possible to get momentarily stuck because sometimes you have to do certain events and inquiries in a certain order to make progress. I'd say the interface and interactions you can perform in this game serve more as a tool to make you more immersed in the world and the story than its traditional mechanical challenges, and it achieves this effect quite well. It's magnificent how well the game can pull you in with such limited graphics. Not that there's anything wrong with the pixel art. There's nice attention to detail in many scenes, and the visuals do a good job of portraying these cyberpunk cityscapes. However, it's the audio that steals the show here. The music does a great job of building a tense and mysterious atmosphere, and the plentiful voice acting is really good for '94 standards. There is a lot of hype surrounding this game due to its high price tag. While there are games with better stories and writing out there, you have to keep in mind that there was nothing like it when it hit the scene 20 years ago. While PC gamers had already seen some titles like Gabriel Knight by then, there wasn't any game as well written and engrossing as Snatcher on consoles. So it must have been a mind-blowing experience for the few that did experience it when the game first came out. Even when judged by modern standards, Snatcher still delivers a memorable experience. So believe the hype.
Metal, introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. Pleased to meet you, Gillian. I am Metal Gear Mach 2. I am programmed to be your personal assistant.
Metal Gear? That's a pretty weird name.
Snatcher is only one of many Japanese games inspired by Blade Runner, but there's another interesting one that's worth a look. While I was browsing PC98 ROMs a few months back, a game by the name of Do Dutch Wives Dream of Electric Eels caught my attention. As most fans of Blade Runner probably know, it was inspired by a novel called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. So I googled the game's name and came across this article. Apparently this game is an adventure RPG hybrid, where you go across looking for sentient love dolls. And how do you tell them apart from real women? By using this command, of course. I haven't been able to get the game working on my emulator, so can't tell you anything that the article doesn't cover. I just wanted to use this opportunity to mention this bizarre Blade Runner-inspired early JRPG. I'd love to capture footage from the real hardware, but this game is very expensive and I don't want to stress my Duo's laser with burned CDs. So yet again, I'll have to resort to using footage by World of Long Plays. With that out of the way, Beyond Shadowgate is a TurboGrafx CD exclusive sequel to Shadowgate. It's been a while since I've played it, so I can't remember much from the story. What I do remember is the Sierra-style death animations, which can be graphic and at times funny.
And Sister Ruth, and Great Aunt Matilda with her pet goose, and my friend Beatrice on my father's horse. Now, that horse usually...
You can also punch people, which is a fun addition to the standard set of adventure game commands. The hand-painted backgrounds look really nice, but the voice acting is lame. Other than that, I don't have much to say about this game. If you're only familiar with point-and-click adventures on PC, this is a game worth checking out, as it's one of the best exclusives on the system. The Pink Panther Passport to Apparel must be one of the best educational games of all time. The story is mostly a setup to get you exploring different countries, though it does take an unsuspected and memorable turn later on. You're sent to a summer camp for gifted children from all over the world, and it's your job to ensure everything goes right to secure nothing less than world peace. However, the children suddenly start acting strangely and complaining a lot, so you have to go visit their home countries. The game tries to teach children about different countries and cultures, but it never comes across as a boring educational game. There's a built-in encyclopedia, which you can totally ignore. Different cultures also aren't presented in an idyllic light. For example, in India, the game jokes about the overcrowded trains and how dirty the river Ganges is, and there's a disco song explaining the caste system. It's worth stressing that the educational elements aren't very overt. Although you can't skip the songs, Passport of Peril is a charming and funny adventure game on its own right, even if it's more simple and aimed at a younger audience. There's a lot of humor, both cartoony hijinks to amuse the younger crowd, and verbal jokes that might go above the heads of children. It's a bit like Day of the Tentacle in that sense, though the focus is more on physical humor. The main character is also really likable. At least, I rank him pretty high up on the list of adventure game protagonists. Although Pink Panther didn't talk in the cartoons, he has a voice here.
It's a rotten dump! A dump! You hear me? R-O-T-T!
Close enough. Your next word is hyperbole.
That could have easily backfired, but the voice actor does a great job. He doesn't try to play cool by being overly sarcastic and snarky, but he also isn't a bumbling buffoon who's trying to make the Guybrush Threepwood lightning strike again for the millionth time. So many adventure games try to copy the style of LucasArts that it's refreshing to see a humorous and/or likable character that can stand on his own. Of course, the game isn't perfect, but it's one of the most likable adventure games of its kind that I've played. Sadly, it doesn't work on new computers, so you have to run it on Virtual PC as it's too new for DOSBox. The game was successful enough to warrant a sequel called Hocus Pocus Pink, which is a similar globe-trekking adventure. Fish Files. The story tells about college students whose pet fish are captured by aliens. There's not much to say about the gameplay, other than it's easy to end up backtracking and getting stuck because you didn't talk to some NPC enough times. Fish Files is technically impressive for having so many different colors on the screen at once. That's because it uses a special graphics chip. The distorted art style seems inspired by cartoons like home movies. It works well enough in this context, but the developers could have picked a better, more easily readable font. While back in 2001, the thought of a portable adventure game might have been novel, this game hasn't aged very well due to the Game Boy's small screen and technical limitations. There are better adventure games and visual novels on DS with far sharper visuals. 1993 and 4 must have been the peak years of cyberpunk. With so many games being released, it's no wonder that the Sierra subsidiary Dynamix's Rise of the Dragon didn't garner much attention. This game doesn't even pretend that it isn't ripping off Blade Runner. It's set in a cyberpunk Los Angeles, and the trench coat wearing main character's name is William Blade Hunter. He's hired by a local politician to uncover the origin of a new and dangerous drug that's killed the mayor's daughter. The game world is more interactive than in Snatcher. For example, you can turn on a faucet in a shower, and you must remember to insert your security pass into computers and doors when you want to use them. The structure is also non-linear in a few sections. I remember that there's one screen where you can open a door by blowing it up if you don't get there in time, and the police seal the area. but I don't know if there are any other puzzles with more than one solution. The Sega CD version's graphics look like they've been filtered through a piece of dark green glass, but the areas do fit the cyberpunk theme well. As a nice touch, some of them feature small animated details like trash in the wind, cranes in the distance, and bypassers' legs in this window. The story cutscenes are done in a graphic novel style, and some of them are quite well drawn. Voice acting ranges from mediocre to god-awful.
Need a good used hover car? Momar's Cars has the answer for you.
Boy, am I thirsty. I think I'll have a drink at this water fountain.
At the end, there's a wonky run-and-gun and a light gun section, so that's something to keep in mind if you hate action sequences in adventure games. But other than that, it's a decent title if you're hankering for a cyberpunk point-and-click. Ace Ventura Pet Detective feels like a budget title, so it's understandable if contemporary critics bashed the game and it didn't sell very well as a result. The animation can be really limited, and there are only a couple of locations in the entire game. But for what it is, it's an enjoyable licensed game. Long as you expect the game to be more akin to Virtual Stupidity and Virtual Springfield than a full-fledged adventure. There are familiar characters, and even jokes that were lifted verbatim from the first movie.
Don't worry, if you're not back in 5 minutes, I'll just wait longer.
Like a glove.
Woo! Do not go in there.
The puzzles at the start are really easy, and there are some shallow action segments, so it feels like the game is aimed at kids, even though you'd think that something more like The Mask would have been a better choice for source material in that case. So as a result of that, the focus here is placed solely on the titular hero. What's going to make or break this game for you is whether or not you like this brand of hyperactive, non-sequitur, and innuendo-ridden 90s cartoon humor or not. Jim Carrey's performances are so over the top that he's like a live-action cartoon character, so he's a good fit for a game like this. He didn't actually voice himself in this game, so I've got to hand it to the voice actor.
You know, Spike, it's an ugly sight when Jell-O goes bad. Ew! I'm not touching that! Who knows where it's been? I don't think so.
There are two Tiny Toons adventure games on PS1, Plucky's Big Adventure and Buster and the Beanstalk. The latter has much more appealing 2D graphics, but I've never figured it out. You can click on things, but I haven't found any items or puzzles for that matter, so I've got no clue what to do, or even if I'm supposed to solve any puzzles. All you can do is cause random reactions like this to happen.
Way back, it's gone!
Between screens you move like in a platformer, so I'm not sure if you're even supposed to solve inventory puzzles in this game. It's a shame that the gameplay is so lacking that I've never had the patience to play this game very long, as it has nice graphics and surprisingly sharp writing for a kid's game.
Anytime you forget what you're looking for, just tap on the magic speaker, and I, the beautiful and mysterious princess, will help you due to contractual obligations that I must adhere to.
Another CDI adventure game worth a look at is Lost Eden, though it's also available on PC and 3DO. There was dinosaur craze in the early to mid-90s, and of course this game wanted to be part of it. It's set in a world where dinosaurs and humans coexist. There's not much to the gameplay. You slowly move forward in these pre-rendered 3D environments while listening to new agey music and trying not to fall asleep. There's another mid-90s fad that was caused by Myst's popularity. Don't get me wrong, I like the concept, but I feel that this game doesn't do that style of adventure gaming justice. It's very boring and paced slowly. I just wanted to mention this game because it's a nice showcase of what the CDI is capable of with the FMV cartridge installed. Vampire Story was developed by some former LucasArts employees. It has really beautiful graphics, but the writing is overly verbose, unfunny, and at times annoying. Noctropolis is a rare example of a game that uses digitized actors on 2D backgrounds. It has some nice, somewhat cyberpunkish areas, but I found it to be completely unremarkable otherwise. Frankenstein, Through the Eyes of the Monster. I actually haven't had the time and motivation to track down a copy and play this FMV game with Tim Curry in it that was released on the Saturn only in Europe. I didn't include Darkmere because it's an action-adventure game, but it has a fairly well-developed conversation system for an action game. The isometric pixel art graphics are really dark and moody. Shadow of the Comet is an atmospheric Lovecraftian horror adventure. Someday I might cover it in depth. Orion Burger is a pretty nice cartoon adventure that's somewhat popular. Blue Force is a Police Quest clone by the series creator Jim Walls. Rex Nebular is notable for being an adventure game made by Microprose. Design-wise and visually, the game is average, so due to lack of creativity and unique content, it's not really something I'd recommend. Gilbert Goodmate is probably the closest thing we have to a Curse of Monkey Island 2, but it's not amazing by any means. You play a Droopy-esque private detective in this Italian-developed adventure. The game has nice cartoon graphics and weird characters.